Altidore, the strike, and he scored it!
That's a goal with an exclamation point.
This is how you start a game. The mentality of the posture of the United States. Jozy Altidore picking the ball up 25, 30 yards out and absolutely ripping this ball into the upper corner. Grandal doesn't even dive for it.
I can't let it slide. I am a real American.
Welcome back to Counterattack. I am Dan Bloom. The clip you just heard coming into this segment, friend of the show, Kyle Martino, calling Jozy Altidore's game-winning goal 1-0 over Guadeloupe a disappointing win, if you can have such a thing, in the Gold Cup for this USA squad.
But that was a silver lining. I mean, that was a gorgeous strike by Jozy. That's what we've been waiting for him to do. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been waiting and watching this mammoth. You know, he's an absolute physical specimen, and finally he lets one rip. I mean, that was quite a goal.
Not a word will be spoken in the studio until we address the main man sitting to my left, preeminent soccer writer in America, Grant Wahl, is joining the program today. Grant, thanks so much for being with us today on Counterattack.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Now, Grant Wahl is in town for one reason and one reason only. It is the Gold Cup quarterfinals against Jamaica at RFK Stadium, an absolutely gargantuan day in U.S. soccer. Taking place tomorrow, it's part of a doubleheader quarterfinal, USA versus Jamaica. People not so confident at this point about the performance of the U.S. team, but we'll have to see how they do. Of course, many people remember Grant Wahl's well-publicized run for FIFA president. Unfortunately, for those of us supporters, beaten out, surprisingly, by Sepp Blatter.
I was shocked.
Didn't see that one coming. Sepp Blatter reaffirmed another 4-year term for the head of FIFA. Grant, you've been doing a lot of writing about this recently, and I want to know, just for all people, including myself, who are not eminently familiar as you are with the inner workings of some of these political deals, I'm going to start with this question. Who is Chuck Blazer? Does he look like Santa Claus, and why is he so important to the story unfolding in FIFA? Why is Chuck Blazer important in Zurich?
It's a great question. Google Chuck Blazer and you'll see pictures and you'll understand why people compare him to Santa Claus.
Yes.
A bearded fellow, very... he's not missing any meals. He happens to be a pretty interesting guy who you could argue is the most powerful American in world soccer. He's the only American on the FIFA executive committee. Mm-hmm. And yet he's kind of been, even for soccer people in America, behind the scenes for a long time. And yet, he's the number 2 guy at CONCACAF. He turned in the number 1 guy, Jack Warner, on bribery evidence just about a month ago, I guess, right before the FIFA election. And you could argue that's a fascinating personal situation. Guys that worked hand in hand atop CONCACAF for the last 21 years, and one turning on the other. And so you can understand now why there's so much friction between the island Caribbean nations and CONCACAF and the rest of the Confederation.
Yes, and now it seems that the Caribbean confederations, the heads of the FAs in the Caribbean, have now turned Blazer in for slander, I believe, is the investigation they're calling for. So this infighting is reaching absolutely huge, nuclear levels in CONCACAF.
It is, and it's such a farce at this point that I've come to the conclusion it's just political theater, in a sense, because if this was a really big problem, the CONCACAF Gold Cup wouldn't be coming off right now, and Jamaica wouldn't even have their team here, and instead, they're going to play against the U.S.
Right.
So basically, it's a bunch of political guys going to the mattresses against each other because they want to save their political careers in soccer. And it is what it is. I'm curious to see, obviously, if Jack Warner gets banned for life from FIFA for what he's been accused of here. That would have an impact. And obviously, if there were to be a split between the Caribbean nations and the rest of the Confederation, could the U.S. end up maybe in its own confederation? Might it end up getting connected to CONMEBOL, the South American Confederation? That would have a big impact.
I was going to ask you about that because you floated that idea in your last column, and that just seemed like a stunning idea to me, that CONCACAF could actually splinter here. And to me, that would leave the Caribbean countries in a very compromised position, almost like a New Zealand, probably dependent on a play-in game to even have an ability to qualify for the World Cup.
It would be strange, and I don't know if that's good for soccer or not. I don't personally think the Caribbean islands have that much of a positive impact on American soccer. It's not like they're making the U.S. team much better by the level of competition they're bringing to the table. From a competitive standpoint, it'd be great if the U.S. was connected to South America, I think. But will it happen? I'm leaning against that right now. It seems like a pretty drastic thing. And the U.S. also, as much as it wants to get better, doesn't want to be put in a situation where it's not qualifying for the World Cup every 4 years because they get a ton of money out of that.
See, I was just thinking that. I mean, if the United States is lumped in with the South American teams, it's going to be much more difficult. I mean, we had, I believe, 5 South American teams make it to the knockout stage of the World Cup last year. Do you think that would be, really hurtful to United States soccer if we're lumped in with some talented South American teams?
Well, it just depends, I mean, you've got both sides of it. Would the U.S. get better on the field? Yes. I mean, it could be great competition. If the U.S. misses a World Cup, though, that's a huge problem for the sport in America, for ESPN promoting it on television.
Yeah.
Can you imagine having a World Cup being promoted by them that did not include the U.S.?
And they've already bought the rights.
Right.
So it's going to happen regardless.
And it seems like they have a pretty good thing going where they are now. CONCACAF, I mean, it seems to be, you have Mexico and the United States who are clearly the top, the biggest fishes in this pond. It would just be a shame to see that broken up. And then, what happens to these Caribbean teams? How difficult would it be for them to make the World Cup?
Actually, I wouldn't mind it necessarily if it was the U.S. and Mexico and the Central American countries and Canada. I mean, you're talking at that point about maybe 9 or 10 teams in that confederation, kind of like South America. And there are fewer tiny teams without the Caribbean teams involved.
Right, Guadeloupe. Although they showed up pretty well for themselves, I have to say. For a team that can't make the World Cup and isn't even involved as a FIFA nation, they did pretty well. But just to get back to this Blazer point, just for one moment, because I think it's a fascinating political story, and I love, by the way, how you were able to somehow work in Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger legitimately could end up being a real part of this story, which cracks me up. But it makes sense in some ways because Mohammed bin Hammam, the leader of the Qatari bid and former candidate for FIFA president, he is alleged to have been basically offering to or paying off the heads of the Caribbean FAs for a vote for FIFA president. But it also stands to reason, perhaps, that there was some malfeasance going on during the World Cup vote for 2018 and 2022. So Blazer, as you said, the U.S.'s only representative on the FIFA Executive Committee, perhaps has an axe to grind with the rest of the heads of the FAs in his confederation for not supporting the U.S. bid. Well, bin Hammam gets thrown out of FIFA, well, suspended, that is, for now, from the evidence that he has presented. So the upshot, potentially, and this is my question to you, and you addressed this in your last column a little bit, is does the U.S., perhaps, as an upshot of all this, have a chance at getting a revote for the 2022 World Cup? And could we win it?
It's possible. It's possible. I don't know if the chances are all that high because right now we've seen that FIFA only takes severe actions when they have uncontrovertible evidence in front of them, and they don't do their own investigating for the most part. They've hired
keep it in the family.
A guy to look into this current situation. They hired the former FBI director for the U.S. to do that, but they don't usually on their own investigate unless somebody brings something to them. We haven't seen any evidence so far that the Qataris have actually paid anybody off. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. We've also seen the German guy on the executive committee say publicly that he would like to see an investigation because there are so many questions into the Qatari World Cup bid and how they got it. So we'll have to wait and see how it shakes out. And I think nobody's quite certain at this point. What are the chances? I would say we're looking probably at like 1 to 5% on a revote at this point.
Gotcha. And one more question about FIFA. I just noticed a little bit of news I found interesting. UEFA, led by Michel Platini, who are trying to do their own reforms of the way that their competitions are led, are now saying to FIFA, get your house in order, and we want to see some action in the next 3 months, which in some ways seem kind of bold for me, for UEFA, albeit the most powerful regional confederation, to be able to tell FIFA what to do and to get their act in order. So my first question is, what's your reaction to that? And my second one is, do you see Michel Platini perhaps as a future president of FIFA?
I do. I think he's the most likely guy in 2015, actually. And my guess is if I was betting money that I would say he would be the guy. So what's interesting to me is in general now we're starting to see battles in world soccer between economic powerhouses and political powerhouses. And the political powerhouses, which have been like FIFA itself and the Caribbean countries, because they've got the one country, one vote, they've got political power, aren't necessarily pulling their weight economically. And we have that in our own confederation here. The U.S. and Mexico are the economic powerhouses. That's why the Gold Cup always takes place in America. That's why the Mexican national team plays more games in the United States than it does in Mexico. And so the battle is taking place, and you would think that in the end, probably the economic power may end up winning. And the same thing could be said in UEFA. They're an economic powerhouse, and they're starting to flex their muscles representing the European clubs as well, that in the end could be something that FIFA worries about more than anything, because those clubs have far more games, far more money.